I think the fight for human rights has never been more important than it is today, with totalitarian countries on the rise across the world. And unfortunately, including here in the United States, at least for the past 4 years, but there's still a lot of that problem right here in this country right now. I'm going to be talking about social media, which are both part of the problem and I think one of the best remedies for the problem. Now clearly, social media, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, all of these media, Instagram, do add to the problem by disseminating hate speech, lies, and things that mislead people, stir them up, evoke anger. But the best way, I think, in fact, the only way I think that this problem should be mitigated is by the social media themselves. And a very dangerous way of trying to deal with this problem is to bring in the government of the United States, and the same would apply if this were going on in any other country. It's a very dangerous thing to do because the government has awesome powers. The government is armed. The government has all kinds of ways of enforcing its will. And in fact, here in the United States, we have a First Amendment, which says Congress shall make no law abridging freedom of speech or the press. And I take that very seriously. The language couldn't be any more clear. One of the great Supreme Court justices in the 20th century, Hugo Black, once said, I don't get why people have a problem understanding this. No law means no law. Now, I guess it could be argued, some people have argued that social media are not the press. I think that's nonsense. Of course, they're the press. It doesn't matter whether you have the New York Times on your masthead. It doesn't matter whether the television station says MSNBC. Clearly, Twitter and Facebook and the other social media every day disseminate a huge amount of news. And again, I think they need to do much more to weed out the lies, to label lies as lies, to basically cancel accounts as they've been doing when people keep trying to use the systems to mislead the public. But unfortunately, just the other day, we saw here in the Congress of the United States, and from some progressive people in Congress, statements that said, well, we have to do something as a government to regulate these media. And I think that would be a grave mistake. And you don't have to go any further back than just a few months ago when Donald Trump was president to see what a big mistake that would be, because Donald Trump thought any medium that was critical of him was therefore engaging in fake news. It was impossible to be critical of Trump, according to Trump, without lying. In fact, there's a lot of truthful criticism of Trump. He, in his presidency, did an enormous amount of things that were very damaging. And far from it being a lie to report that, it's in fact the truth to report that. But Trump didn't like to hear that. And so he called for a crackdown on Twitter. He banned TikTok in the United States. God knows what would have happened had Trump been reelected. And he fought very hard to lie to the American people that he had been reelected when, in fact, he lost the election, and quite handily. So right there and then, you don't have to go any further. You can see the danger in the government controlling social media. Just think, Trump was the government. And you know what? The Republicans who supported Trump and still do in the Congress, they were the government and they are still by and large in the Congress. So that's who we are talking about today when we say the government will have the solution. And I think the founding fathers understood that. But there's also even a larger cultural context that I'd like to explore with you just briefly. And this has to do with what media theorists call gatekeeping. And what that word means, it refers to the fact that prior to social media, the only way that any individual anywhere in the United States or the world could get information out to the public was if a gatekeeper, an editor of a newspaper, a producer of a television or radio show said that was okay. And as we all know, and I grew up in that world, a sliver, less than 1% of the people in this world, far less than 1%, ever got to get their voices out there in the world. And, there are many, many examples of this. And one of my favorite poems, which was written a long time ago, back in 1751 by Thomas Gray, is called Elegy in a Country Churchyard. The whole poem is really beautiful and gets at this problem. But there's one situation in that poem, 4 lines, which especially describe what I'm talking about. Gray says, many a gem of purest ray serene, the dark unfathomed caves of oceans bare. Many a flower was born to blush unseen and waste its sweetness in the desert air. And what Gray was talking about was the gatekeeping that, of course, existed back in his time and existed for centuries after until social media came along. And there are many astounding examples of this. The Beatles were turned down by 25 different record companies before they got their first contract. Can you imagine that? Someone came in and played, I Wanna Hold Your Hand. And, no, I don't quite hear it. Thanks, guys. We're going to pass on you. And, there are great novels. For example, a novel called The Confederacy of Dunces that was written in the late 1960s, went on to win the Pulitzer Prize. But that was after a major publishing company in New York turned it down, and the author actually took his life. He was so despondent. And then some other small publisher realized it was a great novel. So gatekeeping, although it's supposed to do the job of just allowing good things to be disseminated and keeping out the trash and the lies, unfortunately, in the media, and again, totally aside from the government, has always been too aggressive. And in addition to keeping out the trash, it's kept out those beautiful flowers, those gems of purest ray serene. So I'll just conclude by saying, yeah, our social media need to improve their operation. But the last thing we want to do is bring in the government to regulate them. The government should keep its hands off of social media because at this moment, and better than any time in history, social media are giving the voiceless all around the world a voice. Thank you.